Hello, I'm delighted to make this video finally to replace the one that I had that we made for version 8 of the BRC Food Safety Standard, where we gave you an introduction or a taster to the course. We're going to do the same for you now, but give you a new taster to the version 9 course materials and just to see what it's about. Perhaps you're thinking about attending the course. Maybe you've been thinking for a little while, and this might just help you to make up your mind and give you a feel for what's involved. So I'm going to share my screen here. And you can see I've got a few slides prepared for you. I'm not going through the whole course, of course. I'm just giving you a taster from each of the sections of the course. Now, this is to show you that when STC Academy brings you this training, and we've trained hundreds of people already on these courses, the version 9 courses, since the courses came out in September of 2022. And you can see that when we bring you this course, we do this in a combined way. Let me explain a bit more. So here we've got days 1 and 2. This is the 2-day site training course, typically for people who work for a BRC certified site. And this is taking them through the clause requirements. And these are from Senior Management Commitment Section 1 all the way through to Traded Products Section 9. You can see that this is really where we've got quite a intense level of training going on in these 2 days, but we also have auditors joining in, and we have lead auditors joining in on these first 2 days. The site's attendees will do their exam at the end of day 2 and get their certificate and know all about the main changes in those first 9 sections in part 2 of the standard, the clause requirements. Then those attending the 3-day auditor course, they of course need to do additional training because auditors need to understand exactly how the scheme is managed and all the extra things such as um, the unannounced versus announced or blended, etc. And then those attending the last 2 days, so the full 5-day course, they will gain a lead auditor qualification. So let me show you this in a little bit more detail. Now, we know that there were good reasons to update the standard to version 9, including changes to codex and validation and things like that. We've introduced not we, BRC introduced the section specifically regarding slaughter, primary conversion. So yeah, there have been quite a few changes in version 9. Now, just on that particular point, I'm fairly certain and confident that you have the skills to do the research yourself and understand the changes in version 9. Looking at the key changes document that's freely available on BRC's website, you can look at those key changes, you can research, you can prepare for yourself, and nobody says that you have to attend these courses. Saying that, the trainers like myself, we are experienced auditors, and it's lovely to get that level of insight and understanding on what's behind these clause changes. This is what we do for you. We do go the extra mile to explain the interpretation, to explain the intention behind the clause requirements from an auditor's point of view, from a site's point of view, from an overall compliance point of view. So here's a little taste. We look at the culture plan, and of course, this is not new. This came out in issue 8, but there are changes to this particular clause. And also, a lot of people are getting a little desperate and thinking, what more can I do? And so we talk again about this concept in detail. In terms of HACCP, there have been changes to 212, specifically heavily focusing on validation. Now, we know validation is a weakness in the food industry. A lot of people don't appreciate or understand exactly what it's supposed to entail and the level of depth that the studies are supposed to go into. Now, validation shows up in a number of sections in the standard, but it shows up here specifically where Codex in 2020 put the emphasis on the step in the 7 principles requiring validation and verification to take place as before the last principle of documentation. So those changes from Codex have been adopted into this GFSI standard, the BRC Food Safety Standard, and BRC explains what they expect to see when it comes to validation, internal audits. There's focus on dealing with non-conformities as you would according to 3.7, which is corrective and preventive action. And yeah, we just explain exactly what they mean BRC doesn't mean that you have to do full root cause analysis on every audit non-conformity. They mean do it as we are guided in 3.7, where you've got a significant risk or there's a trend. Then yes, it involves all of this in-depth investigation. There's a change to the definition of outsourced processing. And you might wonder why it's important to understand this. Well, if you're an auditor, you need to certainly be able to identify whether something is considered outsourced or whether it's not. As well, if you're a site, you need to know whether you need to comply with 354. So just understanding the changed definition to outsourced processing, that's what we do. And just for interest, it does include storage. Yeah, so the product has to start with you, go somewhere else, could be just for storage, come back to you, and that does make 354 relevant. In 4.3, the layout of the facility is important. We know we have to fix that on paper in a site plan, not literally paper, but fix that in a document. But the interesting thing is that in 4.3.1, this is what BRC says, here is where you need to decide on your risk zoning. Section 8 simply explains to us how we meet those requirements for those risk zones. The decision, though, is made here, and we know that in version 9, the decision tree to guide us on risk zoning, that's been taken out of version 9, not because it was wrong, just because the explanation that they give is sufficient in the standard. So the understanding the risk zoning principles is important, and it's in 4.3.1 that we make the decision as to whether we've got any risk zones. There's a new requirement in 5.6.2 to consider measurement uncertainty when it comes to lab testing. Consider measurement uncertainty. That might ring a bell for you. You might be thinking, oh, I know there's something on measurement uncertainty. And typically that's been on equipment that was used to measure critical control points. That's where you need to take into account uncertainty. However, this is different. This is now your lab results. Could be that you're testing product, for example. This is where they're saying consider measurement uncertainty. In 6.2, labeling and pack control. This is a fundamental. Of course, there's always focus on labeling. We know that it's a big deal. It causes lots of issues, lots of recalls. And so there was great emphasis in version 8. There's also great emphasis in version 9. I took the slide just to mention that there's a print error, and this erratum is published on the BRC website. And it's just simply missing a bullet point. So it just makes it hard to read, that's all. All the content is there, though, and it is correct in the interpretation guide. In this section here, we understand what sort of evidence the auditor is looking for, what evidence you need to show to meet this clause so that errors cannot happen. In section 7, there's a lot of focus on competency. And in fact, in the whole of the standard, it's one of those key principles that underpins every single section. And it's something that the auditor, that we're teaching auditors to specifically look for, is not just looking for training records or ticking boxes. It's discussing what if scenarios when you interview auditees at a site. It's talking through a process, it's watching people, it's discussing concepts to understand that the site and their staff have the required competencies in whatever it is they're doing in that business. Yeah, understanding that level of competency. And these are the concepts that we discussed during our training as well. As I said before, we're not just looking at the clause requirements in terms of the wording. It's important to understand the intention behind the clause from that competency point of view. Now, you know that you can meet a requirement in many different ways, and so we are teaching the sites, we're teaching the auditors, we're teaching consultants, we're teaching certification bodies as well, not just to expect to see something done the way they would do it, but to be able to assess whether something that's been done in a different way still meets the intention of the clause, as well as the actual clause requirement. Sometimes the specific words are meaningful and do make a difference when you look at the exact wording, but at the same time, you've got to understand the intention behind the wording. And this again just comes down to that competency. In this risk zones section, section 8, again, because they've taken the decision tree out, here we discuss the concepts and look at exactly how to comply with meeting those requirements for those risk zones, including the environmental monitoring required, the validation of cleaning, etc., that's required in these areas. We know it's not about allergens, it's about pathogens, isn't it? Just an interesting point. The standard specifies BRC's minimum requirements, and we always make it clear that, of course, you can exceed those requirements. Of course, you can. So, this is a nice example where you might not need a high risk area. You might only need high care, but you might choose to put air handling in there for positive pressure from filtered air. You might choose to do that anyway. So, in theory, you are meeting the requirements for high risk. But you don't need to, you only need high care. You've exceeded BRC's requirements. Of course, you can do that. Likewise, BRC says that these risk zones are all about preventing contamination from pathogens or contamination by pathogens. Absolutely correct. However, you can exceed those requirements and you can make it about spoilage. If that's important to you and if that's relevant to your product and you need to prevent spoilage microbes, you can have these controls in place. For that reason, you've exceeded BRC's requirements. Traded products, we go through this section, of course, to understand it. And in fact, the biggest change here, or one of the biggest changes, is making sure that you've got those products covered in a HACCP plan. We don't forget that we've taken responsibility for those products, even though we don't manufacture them. We're selling them, we take the responsibility. And that's what Section 9 is all about, is that due diligence, taking that ownership for these products that we are selling. So that takes us through the first 2 days, essentially, sections 1 through to 9. And then on day 3, for auditors, we go through the scheme requirements and how that scheme is managed, touching on things, for example, like announced, unannounced, and blended audit options, etc. All the intricacies of understanding the whole scheme. And it could be an auditor that we're training, it could be somebody from a certification body that we're training to understand these requirements, could be consultants that we're training. Sometimes sites, yes, staff from sites choose to attend the auditor course or the lead auditor course because they want to know what the auditor knows. Yeah, or perhaps you want to audit your suppliers against the BRC scheme. And so for that reason, a lot of people get the lead auditor qualification, even if they have no intention of becoming a third party auditor for a certification body. So yes, it's looking at the intricacies of things like how do you manage head office and central functions and what happens to the report and how do you write the report? And how do you deal with nonconformities at a head office? And are the sites affected by head office nonconformities? Things like that. Takes us through the rules. Day 4 and 5 are quite interesting because this is where we are sharing with you the auditing skills. Auditing skills, what's expected from a lead auditor, understanding the principles of 19011, the principles of auditing, and understanding what audit criteria are. What are audit criteria? And we talk through all of these things from the point of view of understanding the principles of auditing. Yeah, this is what makes a good auditor. This is what makes a lead auditor, is understanding these criteria, understanding the expectations from a lead auditor. Of course, as I said before, the trainers that we have are experienced in auditing and consulting, and they know what it's like. And if you're not as familiar with BRC audits or being there from the auditor's point of view, sitting on the other side of the table, we discuss what it's like as an auditor, having to write up a report or trying to write up a report while you are auditing, trying to spend your 50% of the time in the factory, whilst knowing that you've got a ton of paperwork to get through, dealing with auditees, and making it a team effort that works really well so that you get through all the audit criteria in the given time. And we talk about these practicalities and tips and advice that we've learned from our experience as well. We go through the process and look at the risks, things that can threaten the success of the audit, dealing with audit teams, for example, having to really manage the audit. It is the lead auditor's job to manage the audit. If it doesn't go well, if you had a difficult site, a difficult situation to get through, It's the auditor's responsibility. Of course, you've got the support from the certification body. Yes, absolutely. You can call on them. You're not completely alone. But ultimately, it's the auditor's responsibility to get through this successfully and manage all risks to the process. We're talking about audit skills as well, and we take we take people through this, explaining and guiding. And in fact, a lot of our attendees, because it's a very interactive course, are able to share their experiences. A lot of our attendees are already very experienced auditors, and sometimes they just updating their qualification. Sometimes they've been consultants for years, and they are very often contributing to the course, where a lot of times people say to me after a course that the thing they enjoyed the most was hearing from the other attendees. And that's fantastic. So it's lovely when we can share stories and skills and tips and on how to get through an audit successfully, regardless of which side of the table you're on. We talk about the audit report and how important this is and how to handle it and tackle it. Knowing that it's going to be written in a very specific way for BRC, we go through the technical review process that has to happen at the CB, the certification body, um, and all the criteria to have a successful output from the successful audit. And that output is the report, and that's it. So I'm going to stop my share. And that was just a taster of the sites, the auditor and the lead auditor qualifications that we deliver for version 9 of the food standard. I hope that's useful.